In the early 17th century, Catholic missionaries traveling through Asia reported something that shouldn't be possible. During a period of brutal persecution, a Dominican friar appeared to them offering comfort, encouragement, and a physical presence. Not unusual for a saint, perhaps, except for one detail recorded in the monastery logs back in Lima, Peru. The friar in question, Martin de Porres, had never left his room. 9,000 miles of Pacific Ocean separated these two locations, yet Martin was documented as living his ordinary life in Lima on the exact same dates that missionaries reported him standing beside them in Asia. Now, I'm not asking you to decide whether bilocation is real in a literal sense. I'm asking you to sit with the deeper question that this story forces. What if the range of your influence has nothing to do with how hard you try or how far you travel? What if it's determined entirely by who you are being?
When you look at who Martin actually was, the miracle starts to make a different kind of sense. He wasn't a bishop or a scholar, he was a lay brother, essentially the lowest rank in the convent. In a rigidly hierarchical colonial society, he was mixed race, meaning he had every reason to see himself as limited, peripheral, and overlooked. Instead, he chose to inhabit the invisible work. He fed the poor from the convent kitchen. He sat with the dying whom everyone else had abandoned. There is a transcript from his canonization process where witnesses described him tending to patients in different wards of the same hospital simultaneously, moving through locked doors, appearing wherever the need was greatest. He wasn't building a brand here, he wasn't managing a reputation. He had simply organized his entire identity around service to something larger than himself. And somehow that identity refused to stay contained within the walls of one convent.
That is the piece the conscious creation conversations almost always miss. We pour all our energy into controlling external circumstances while overlooking the engine underneath. The environment doesn't primarily respond to your isolated actions. It responds to the identity generating those actions. Sociologists call this role congruence. Think of a judge. A judge doesn't walk into a courtroom and try to convince people to treat him with authority. They inhabit the role so completely that the room organizes around them automatically. No effort is required. What Martin demonstrated and what mystics across traditions have shown is that when an identity is rooted deeply enough in unity and service, influence moves beyond the boundaries that we assume are fixed. The question that changes everything isn't what technique am I using? It's who is the person from whom my desired circumstances would naturally emerge.
There's a story about Martin that stops me every time I read it. One evening, an enslaved man was brought to the convent, beaten, feverish, and close to death. The other brothers hesitated. There were rules around who could be admitted and social hierarchies about who deserved care. Martin didn't deliberate. He carried the man to his own bed and gave him his own blanket. When his superior challenged him for breaking the rules of the house, Martin's response was quiet. Compassion has no rule above it. Now, that wasn't performance of virtue, that was identity speaking. He had so completely resolved the question of who he was that no external hierarchy could override it. That kind of settled, uncontested identity is what those bilocation accounts are really pointing towards. Not a supernatural spectacle, but an internal completeness.
Cognitive science gives us a useful lens for this. Identity is a stabilizing pattern, a set of beliefs and emotional orientations that you carry into every room. Once that pattern is established, it organizes your perception and behavior without conscious effort. The key variable here is coherence. When your beliefs, emotions, and actions are all pointing in the same direction with no internal contradiction, the signal you send into the world becomes remarkably stable. In neuroscience, we see this in flow states. When internal conflict disappears, performance expands in ways that feel effortless. Martin wasn't pursuing coherence as a strategy. He simply was completely that, a person of service all the way down.
We see this in modern leadership research too. A manager who identifies as supervising tasks only affects the immediate work, but a leader who genuinely identifies as shaping a vision influences decisions in conversations where they aren't even present. The difference isn't effort, it's the depth of identity. In conscious creation, people who experience themselves as separate from the world strain to push outcomes into place. But people who experience themselves as participants within something larger, well, they stop pushing. Their actions carry a different quality, not force, but belonging. And belonging, it turns out, travels much further than force ever does.
Behavioral psychology is direct about this. Identity based habits consistently outperform goal based habits. The person who identifies as a writer simply writes. The person who identifies as trying to become a writer fights a civil war within themselves every morning. Martin de Porres didn't wake up and execute a spiritual discipline designed to expand his influence. He woke up as someone whose entire orientation was the well being of others. The influence was a byproduct. It always is.
So, how do we apply this? The shift isn't a new technique, it's a recognition. When you stop asking, how do I change my circumstances, and start asking, who is the person from whom these circumstances would naturally emerge, something underneath reorganizes. Identity shapes perception, perception shapes behavior, behavior shapes the patterns we call our environment. Expand the identity, and the boundary of your influence moves with it. Martin lived this without theorizing it. A lay brother in a colonial convent, documented in Lima, reported in Asia. His research wasn't the result of something he forced, it was the natural radius of who he had become.
And you don't have to believe in the miraculous for this to land. The principle is everywhere. Think of the teachers whose influence travels through decades in the lives of students that they've forgotten meeting. Think of the thinkers whose ideas reshape fields long after they are gone. That isn't force. That's what a coherent identity does when it's rooted in something larger than itself. It carries further than it ever needs to push.
If this question, who are you being, is sitting somewhere in your mind right now, follow it. We'll be continuing this conversation here as we explore the mechanics of consciousness and what it means to create your life by design rather than default. If you want to walk this path with us, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. And until next time, think differently, dream boldly, and create consciously.